The millionaire's maid saved an entire family from a raging fire, risking everything to protect those she barely knew. But then, amidst the smoke and tears, one child looked up and said, "You were supposed to be my dad." What happened next shocked everyone. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The end of a shift at the Hamilton estate was always the same for Amelia. The solid mahogany door closing behind her, the heavy key fob for the security gate in her hand, the quiet walk to the bus stop as the sun dipped below the city's skyline. After a long day of polishing silver and making sure every surface was immaculate, the city air, though thick with exhaust, felt like a promise of freedom. Her cleaning bags, slung over her shoulder, were a familiar weight, a testament to another day's work and the paycheck that was waiting. But today was different. A siren wailed in the distance, then another and another, until the air was a symphony of urgency. As she rounded the corner onto Elm Street, the source of the commotion became horrifyingly clear. A building, an old brick tenement, was on fire. Not a small, containable blaze, but a ferocious living thing, with tongues of orange flame licking at the sky and plumes of black smoke pouring from shattered windows. It was a spectacle of destruction. A crowd had already gathered, their faces lit by the grim orange glow. A sea of smartphones was raised in unison, each person a silent observer, documenting the tragedy. They were captivated by the drama, a safe distance away. Amelia's own heart hammered against her ribs, but her first thought was not of the fire itself, but of the screams. They were high-pitched, desperate, and unmistakable. They were the cries of children. They were coming from the second floor. The sound cut through the general hum of the city, through the excited whispers of the onlookers, and through the blare of the sirens. It was a sound that demanded a response, an instinctual plea that bypassed logic and went straight to the core of her being. Amelia looked at the fire, then at the faces in the crowd. No one was moving. They were all just watching, their phone screens reflecting the dancing flames. The screams from the second floor grew more frantic, punctuated by the sharp crackle of wood and glass. Suddenly, her routine, her bus ticket, her tired feet, none of it mattered. The weight of her cleaning bags felt trivial, an anchor to a life that had suddenly become insignificant. Without a second thought, she slipped the strap from her shoulder and let the bags fall to the ground with a dull thud. The yellow rubber gloves and bottle of all-purpose cleaner tumbled out, scattered on the sidewalk. She took a step, then another, her pace quickening into a run. The heat was an immediate oppressive force. It hit her like a physical wall as she neared the building, a furnace roar in her ears that drowned out the sirens. She pushed past a couple of stunned bystanders at the entrance, ignoring their shouts of, "Get back!" and "What are you doing?" The air inside was thick and acrid, burning her throat and lungs with every breath. The stairwell was a choke point of black smoke and swirling ash. She squinted, her eyes watering, and pressed a hand against the wall, trying to find her way up the stairs. The screams were louder here, more desperate. They were a beacon in the darkness, a painful guide. She found the second-floor landing and was met with a wall of smoke. She dropped to her knees, crawling along the floor, where the air was slightly less toxic. She followed the sound of the children, her hands sweeping the floor in front of her. The heat was scorching, a constant threat of singed hair and burned skin. She ignored it, her focus a pinpoint of pure determination. She found them in a back room, huddled in a corner. The fire hadn't reached them yet, but the smoke was thick, and the room was a sauna. In the corner, 3 children were clinging to each other, their small faces streaked with soot and tears. A toddler, maybe 2 years old, was in the middle of 2 older children, maybe 7 and 8. All three were clutching the hand of a woman who was lying on the floor, still and unmoving. The woman's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and ragged. She was unconscious from the smoke. The older children were trying to shake her awake, their pleas swallowed by the roar of the fire. The little toddler was sobbing uncontrollably. Amelia's heart seized in her chest. This was it. This was the source of the screams. This was the family, and she was the only one there. She looked at the woman, then at the three terrified children. She knew, with a terrible certainty, that she couldn't carry them all. Not with the woman's limp weight, not with the kids clinging to her, not with the fire eating away at the building around them. The path back down the stairs was dark and filled with smoke. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to pin her to the spot. Her mind raced with all the reasons why this was a bad idea, all the ways it could go wrong. The flames, the smoke, the crumbling building. The fact that she was just a cleaning lady, not a firefighter, not a hero. She was a woman who was supposed to be on a bus home, not crawling through a burning building. But then she looked at the children again. The terror in their eyes, the small hands clutching their mother's limp form. A wave of certainty washed over her, pushing aside all fear and doubt. She wasn't a firefighter, but she was a person. She was a human being who had heard their cries and found them when no one else would. She knew, with a clarity that cut through the haze, that leaving them, even for a moment, was not an option. She was their only hope. The fire raged outside the window, a brilliant orange and red that painted the room in an eerie glow. The screams of the children were now a faint, panicked whimper, but they were still a cry for help. A cry that had brought her here. She had let her cleaning bags fall to the ground and run into the flames, hearing the desperate pleas from the second floor. Now, staring at the woman and her three children, she knew she would risk her own life to save them. Amelia's resolve was a sudden, hard-edged thing. She didn't have a plan, only the singular burning need to get the family out. The children were first. She crouched down and looked at the two older ones. Their eyes were wide with terror. "Listen to me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the rasp in her throat. "We're going to play a game, a very fast game of follow the leader. I need you to hold my hand and we're going to walk, just like we're walking home." She didn't wait for an answer, her hand already reaching for the boy's. He instinctively took it. The girl followed, clutching his shirt. The air was getting hotter, the smoke a thick swirling blanket. The ceiling groaned above them, a low, ominous sound. Every second was a threat. She led the two children, telling them to stay low, their small forms almost swallowed by the haze. The unconscious mother was a dead weight. Amelia knew she couldn't carry her and the children at the same time. The fire was roaring, and the stairs were the only way out. She had to make multiple trips. It was a terrifying, insane thought, but there was no other choice. She dragged the mother away from the wall, leaving the toddler with her. "Stay here with your mom," she said to the baby, her voice a promise. "I'll be right back for you." It was a lie, a necessary lie. She had to get the others out first. The journey down the smoke-filled hallway felt like a lifetime. The stairs were a particular kind of hell. The wooden steps creaked ominously with every footfall, and a section of the railing had already burned away. The heat from the floor below was unbearable, a searing heat that promised to buckle the structure at any moment. As they stumbled out of the main entrance, Amelia was met with a wall of noise and a rush of fresh, albeit smoky, air. A firefighter in full gear, his face mask hiding his expression, grabbed the two children from her. "Where did they come from?" he yelled into his radio, his voice a frantic muffle. "There's more inside, a woman and a baby." He was told to get back and to let the trained professionals handle it. She didn't listen. Amelia ran back into the burning building. The second trip was a test of pure endurance. The smoke was thicker now, a suffocating force that stole her breath. She found the baby still clutching the hand of the unconscious mother. She scooped the small child into her arms, the baby's weight feeling both feather-light and impossibly heavy. The screams were gone, replaced by a deep, terrifying silence, broken only by the roar of the fire. The stairs were worse this time. A few steps had completely disintegrated, and she had to jump a small gap while holding the child. She ignored the pain in her lungs, the frantic beat of her own heart. She just kept going, her only focus the light at the end of the hallway. She burst out of the building again, coughing and gasping, and handed the baby to a firefighter. He looked at her, his helmet-covered face a mask of shock. "You went back in?" he asked, but she was already turning around, her eyes fixed on the entrance. The firefighter grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "There's one more," she said, her voice a raw whisper. The fire was growing, the flames now visible from the inside, eating their way toward the second-floor landing. The building was dying. She knew she had to be quick. This was her last chance. Going back in a third time felt like a final desperate gamble. The heat was scorching, the smoke so thick she couldn't see a foot in front of her. She found the mother where she had left her. The woman's skin was hot to the touch, and her breathing was almost imperceptible. Amelia lifted the woman's limp form into her arms, the dead weight of her body, a crushing reality. She wrapped one of the woman's arms around her neck, supporting her head, and began the slow, agonizing crawl back toward the stairs. A loud crack echoed from above, followed by a shower of sparks and falling debris. She looked up, but the smoke was too thick. The ceiling was giving way. She had no time. The stairs were a nightmare. The remaining steps groaned under their combined weight. She went down sideways, dragging the woman's body, her every muscle screaming in protest. Just as she cleared the bottom step, a thunderous crash from above shook the entire building. She scrambled out the door, falling onto the sidewalk with a thud, the unconscious woman still in her arms. The crowd gasped. The roar of the fire was now a symphony of destruction as the second-floor ceiling collapsed with a terrifying sound of splintering wood and crumbling brick. Amelia lay on the ground, gasping for air, the unconscious woman still in her embrace. Firefighters and paramedics rushed to her side, prying the woman from her arms. The children, already being treated in an ambulance, saw their mother being brought to safety, and their collective cries of fear turned into a relieved, tearful wail. The bystanders, who had been documenting a tragedy, were now witnesses to a miracle. They applauded, their hands coming together in a spontaneous, genuine burst of emotion. A man tried to hand her a bottle of water, a woman asked for her name, but Amelia didn't answer. She just sat there for a moment, her lungs burning, her body aching, watching as the paramedics worked on the mother. She saw the children being reunited with her in the ambulance, their small hands reaching out. Her work was done. As the ambulance doors closed and it sped away, the sirens fading into the city's cacophony, Amelia rose to her feet. No one noticed. She had been the center of attention just moments before, but in the chaos, her silent departure went unnoticed. She just turned and walked away, back into the crowd of onlookers, her identity once again a secret. She left as she had arrived, a silent figure in the background as the rescue drew to a close. The smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the thick smoke of the previous day. In the quiet of the hospital ward, the children, wrapped in borrowed blankets, sat on their beds, their small faces clean, but their eyes still wide with the memory of the fire. A nurse was checking on them when the youngest, a boy with soot-smudged cheeks that no amount of washing could erase, spoke. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice a small, tired whisper. "The cleaning lady. The one who saved us." The older girl, the one who had clung to her brother, nodded silently, a tear tracing a clean path down her cheek. "She said she'd be right back," the little boy said, his voice cracking. "She promised." "She was a hero, wasn't she?" she said, But the children's question hung in the air unanswered. The doctors had told them the identity of their rescuer was unknown. She had simply disappeared. Across the hall, in a different room, the children's mother was finally waking up. Her head throbbed, her lungs ached, and for a moment she thought she was still in the haze of smoke. Then a doctor's face came into focus, and the memory of the fire hit her like a physical blow. The heat, the smoke, the feeling of her body giving out. And then, a face. A kind, strong face with determined eyes. She remembered the yellow gloves, the light blue shirt, the woman's steady voice telling her children to follow. There was a woman, she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. A cleaning lady. She was wearing an orange apron. She saved us. The doctor nodded, already writing on his clipboard. Yes, we heard about a civilian who helped. She left before we could get her name. The mother's eyes filled with tears. But she was there, she insisted, her memory of the woman vivid and clear. She had a light blue uniform shirt and a bright orange apron with pockets. She wore yellow cleaning gloves. She looked so concerned, but she was so strong. She carried me. She saved my children. She described her savior in every detail, her words an act of testimony, a way of giving thanks to a woman whose name she didn't know. The conversation was overheard. Mr. Davies, a wealthy real estate developer and the owner of the building that had burned, stood just outside the hospital room, speaking to the attending physician. The fire was a catastrophe for his company, a PR nightmare, and he had come to offer support and ensure the victims were being cared for. He was a man of routines and schedules, a man who saw his world in terms of assets and liabilities. Employees were a line item on a budget, their names a detail for the HR department. But as the mother spoke, a specific image formed in his mind. The light blue uniform shirt, the orange apron, the yellow cleaning gloves. The details were so specific, so precise. He had seen that uniform every day. He hadn't seen the person wearing it, not really. He saw the spotless floors, the dusted shelves, the organized papers. He saw the result, not the cause. The woman, whose face he couldn't quite recall, was a shadow, a ghost, who worked the late shift in his office, polishing the chrome and emptying the wastebaskets. She was the woman who went unnoticed, the person he walked past in the hallway without a second glance. She was, in the most literal sense, invisible to him. The doctor's next words, a summary of the mother's plea, sealed the realization. She was incredibly brave, from what the family can tell. She was inside the building, facing the fire, while everyone else just watched. Davies felt a sickening lurch in his gut. The brave woman who had faced the fire while everyone else just watched was his employee. The woman he never made eye contact with, whose name he didn't know, was a hero. The person he saw as a function, a faceless part of the infrastructure of his business, had been willing to die for a family of strangers. He stood there, stunned, the chaos of the fire and the quiet of the hospital converging in his mind, all centered on a woman he was just now, for the very first time, actually seeing. The children's question, "Where is she, the cleaning lady who saved us?" was a simple, profound question that no one could answer. The mother's detailed description of her savior was an act of raw gratitude. And in a quiet hospital hallway, the powerful millionaire, who had never truly seen his employee, was finally forced to look. He realized with a shock that the hero of the fire was the very woman he had always overlooked, the one who kept his own world clean and orderly, but whose existence had been, to him, completely invisible. Mr. Davies had a name now, but still no easy way to find her. He had to look for her. He spent the next hour walking the halls of the hospital, searching for a face he was only just learning to see. He found her in the waiting room, a space filled with the silent anxiety of relatives and the muted glow of a television screen. She was alone, tucked into a chair in a corner. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was in a simple, faded shirt and a pair of worn jeans, the clothes she had likely been wearing before she put on her work uniform. A faint smudge of ash still clung to her cheek, a ghost of the fire. She looked tired, her hands clasped in her lap, but her posture was one of quiet waiting. He walked over, his expensive shoes silent on the linoleum floor. He stood before her, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The words "thank you" felt hollow, a cheap and insufficient payment for a life saved. The woman who cleaned his floors had done something he, with all his money and power, could never do. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to say thank you," he started, his voice a low, hesitant rumble. "I know who you are. You work for me. You were incredibly brave. I can't begin to thank you enough for what you did." Amelia looked up at him, her eyes steady and clear. She was not intimidated, not impressed. She just looked at him, and her response was simple, direct, and without a trace of pride. "I did what needed to be done." It was a refusal of praise, a statement of fact, a testament to her profound humility. He saw the truth in her eyes. She hadn't acted for glory or recognition. She had acted out of a simple, fundamental human necessity. The children's mother, Elena, had been brought in a wheelchair to the waiting room for a change of scenery and to be with her kids. She saw the interaction from across the room. She had been told by the doctors and nurses about the anonymous woman who had saved her family, and then by Mr. Davies himself, who had come in to check on her. He had told her that he believed he knew the woman, and he had described her. The details of the uniform, the calm demeanor, it all matched. Now she was witnessing the woman in person. Amelia's quiet grace, her almost dismissive humility, touched her more deeply than any grand gesture of heroism. This wasn't a person looking for praise. This was a person who had simply done the right thing. Elena maneuvered her wheelchair closer, her gaze fixed on Amelia. "Mr. Davies moved aside, sensing the space was no longer his. Elena reached out a hand, and Amelia took it. The handshake was firm, a connection forged in the chaos and fear of the fire. "My children told me about you," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "They call you the cleaning lady who saved us. I'll never be able to thank you." Amelia's eyes softened. For the first time, she smiled a little. "I'm just glad they're safe," she said. "That's not enough," Elena insisted, her voice gaining strength. "A thank you isn't enough. A job promotion isn't enough. What you did, what you risked. You're a part of our family now." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. She was a woman who was used to being on the outside, a hired hand, an invisible presence in other people's lives. The word family was alien to her. It was a profound, life-altering offer. Elena continued, "We need someone like you in our lives, someone we can trust, someone with a heart that big. We want you to stay, not as a housekeeper, not as an employee, as part of us. You can live with us. You can be a part of our lives, really be a part of them." Mr. Davies stood by, watching this exchange, humbled by the depth of the human connection unfolding before him. He had offered money and a job, the things he knew. Elena had offered a home and a family, the things that truly mattered. She was offering Amelia a life, not just a paycheck. Amelia's eyes welled up for the first time since the fire. She looked at Elena, at the tired but hopeful eyes of the woman she had carried from the flames, and she saw a future she never thought possible. A future where she wasn't just the cleaning lady, but a part of a home, a part of a family. A future where she wasn't invisible anymore. The words from the beginning, "I did what needed to be done," were still true. But in a quiet hospital waiting room, they had created a path to something new, a new beginning built on gratitude and trust. Life in the temporary home was quiet, a stark contrast to the roar of the fire. The space was small, a modest apartment provided by a relief fund, but it was safe and it was warm. Amelia moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a calming force in the chaos. The children, still shaken from their ordeal, gravitated to her. They watched her as she cooked. They followed her as she tidied up, their small hands reaching for hers. The house had a new rhythm, a new peace. The fear had not vanished, but with Amelia there, it felt containable. The children's mother, Elena, was still recovering, her gratitude a silent, constant presence in the room. In the quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, the two women would talk. It started with simple questions, and then, inevitably, it moved to the fire. Elena wanted to know why. Why had Amelia run into a burning building? Why had she risked her life for strangers? The questions were gentle, but the need for understanding was immense. Amelia, who had spent a lifetime being a silent part of other people's lives, found herself opening up, the words coming out in a slow, hesitant trickle. "I lost someone in a fire once," she said, the words barely a whisper. Eleanor was silent, waiting. "My daughter. She was 5 years old. It was an accident, an old building, a faulty wire." Amelia's eyes, which had been so steady and calm in the fire, now held a deep, ancient sorrow. She told the story without a single sob, with the practiced detachment of someone who has relived the moment 1,000 times. The fire had taken her husband too. It had taken her entire world. The story explained everything, her quick, decisive action. The way she had moved through the smoke, not with a hero's bravado, but with the painful certainty of someone who knew exactly what the people inside were facing. Her courage, she explained, was not an absence of fear. It was a confrontation with it. It was born of the pain she had carried for years, a pain she had to face and fight every day. She couldn't save her own family, but when she heard the screams of those other children, she knew she had to try. This time, she would not be helpless. The revelation changed everything. The children, who had already formed a strong bond with her, now saw her not just as their rescuer, but as a person with a history, with a heart as broken as their own. The simple question, "Where is the cleaning lady who saved us?" had now evolved into a profound sense of kinship. They began to call her Aunt Amelia, a name that was more than a title. It was an invitation. They had lost their home and their possessions, but they had gained a family member, someone they trusted implicitly, a silent, strong figure who had literally walked through fire for them. The millionaire, Mr. Davies, was not there to hear this story, but the effects of Amelia's actions were having a profound impact on his life all the same. The image of the woman in the ash-stained clothes, her quiet refusal of praise, was an indelible stain on his consciousness. The fire had burned down a part of his past, his cold, transactional way of seeing the world. He started to look at people differently. He saw the security guard in his building not as a uniform, but as a man who had a family. He saw the barista who served him coffee not as a machine, but as a person with dreams. The world, which had always been a backdrop for his business deals and his success, was now populated with individuals, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own silent acts of courage. The fire had not just been an event that destroyed a building, it had been a catalyst. It had shown him that true value wasn't in wealth or property, but in the unseen goodness of people. The woman he had paid to make his world clean and orderly had shown him the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of humanity. She was no longer just the cleaning lady who cleaned his office. She was a widow, a mother who had lost everything, a hero who had carried a family out of the flames. She was a person he had never truly seen. The children, in their innocence, had named her Aunt Amelia. And the millionaire, in his silent contemplation, had finally begun to see the world with new eyes. The fire had not just burned a building, it had scorched the foundations of Mr. Davies's life. The man who had once calculated every cost and every benefit now saw a new equation. Profit was no longer the sole metric. Purpose was. The image of Amelia, a woman he had overlooked for years, risking her life for strangers, haunted him. It was a silent rebuke of his own coldness, a mirror reflecting a world he had chosen not to see. His company owned dozens of properties, some of them derelict, forgotten spaces in the city. There was one in particular a block away from the fire that had sat abandoned for years. He drove past it, and a new vision formed in his mind. A home. Not a luxury high-rise, not a new office space, but a place for families like the one Amelia had saved. A shelter. He knew there was only one person who could lead such a project. He found Amelia at the temporary apartment, her presence a quiet anchor in the small space. He came not as her boss, but as a man changed, a man with a request. He laid out his plan to turn the old, abandoned building into a permanent, safe home for displaced families. He explained his vision with a newfound passion. He wanted to give back, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a heart, a soul. He needed someone who understood what it meant to have nothing and what it meant to be saved. He needed the woman who saw people, not just property. He looked her in the eyes, a look that was now filled with respect, and made his offer. He invited her to lead the project, not as an employee, but as its director. Amelia was stunned. She was a cleaning lady, a woman who lived her life on the fringes of other people's worlds. The idea of being in charge, of managing a project of this scale, was overwhelming. But then she thought of Elena and her children, of her own lost daughter, and she saw the potential. She saw a chance to create a new story, a different ending for families who faced a similar fate. She said yes. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. The story of the fire and the brave, anonymous hero had spread. When Mr. Davies announced the project, and when the community learned that Amelia, the cleaning lady, was the one leading it, they rallied. Construction workers, plumbers, electricians, people who had read the news or heard the story, came forward, offering their services for free. A local hardware store donated materials, and a restaurant organized a food drive for the volunteers. The project became more than a renovation. It became a symbol of a community's collective will to heal. The site of the old abandoned building, a place that had long been a monument to neglect, was transformed. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the quiet decay. Volunteers of all ages worked together side by side, their faces a mix of sweat and determination. Mr. Davies, in a hard hat and work boots, was there every day working alongside them, no longer a distant figure but a part of the team. He watched Amelia lead with a natural grace and authority he never knew she possessed. She organized the volunteers, she chose the layouts, she ensured every detail was thoughtful and caring. She wasn't building a shelter, she was building a home. The project culminated a few months later with a community event to celebrate the opening. The building, once a drab, empty shell, now stood as a vibrant testament to hope. Its windows were bright, its walls were a warm, inviting color. Inside, the rooms were fully furnished, each one a promise of safety and a new beginning. Families who had been displaced by the fire, including Elena's, were the first to move in. The celebration was held on the sidewalk outside, the same sidewalk where Amelia had dropped her cleaning bags and run into the flames. The very ground that had been a scene of tragedy was now the site of a profound triumph. Amelia stood with Elena and her children, watching them as they entered their new home. Mr. Davies stood a little apart, a quiet smile on his face. He had lost a building, but he had gained something far more valuable, a renewed sense of humanity. He had been inspired by her, a woman who had been invisible to him, to create a home for those who had none. The project he had invited her to lead had not only changed the lives of countless families, but it had changed him, and had turned a place of destruction into a powerful, permanent symbol of recomeço, of new beginnings. The new home was a haven of quiet warmth. The soft light from the dining room filled the space with a golden glow. It was a calm night. the kind of stillness that only comes after great turmoil. The room was not quiet, however. It was full of life, of the clatter of silverware and the easy rhythm of conversation. A rich smell of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the air, a scent that was more than just food. It was the smell of comfort, of safety. The table was full. At one end sat the children's mother, Elena, her face no longer etched with fear, but with a profound, peaceful gratitude. At the other end sat Mr. Davies, his posture relaxed, his face open in a way it never had been before. And in the middle, surrounded by the laughter of the children, was Amelia. She was no longer the silent figure in the background. She was a presence, a force of nature that had found a home. The children vied for her attention, telling her stories from their day, their voices a symphony of innocence and trust. Elena watched her with a look of deep affection, a sisterly bond forged not by blood, but by fire. Mr. Davies, the man who had once seen her as an invisible part of his life, now looked at her with a quiet, profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of her worth. This table was not just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of their new reality, a place where everyone belonged, where every voice mattered. The dinner was almost over when the youngest child, a small boy with an even smaller teddy bear clutched in his hands, stood up. He walked over to Amelia, his little legs wobbly, and presented her with the worn brown bear. Amelia looked at the gift, then at the child, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't name. She took the bear, a soft, familiar weight in her hands. She recognized it. It was the same one she had seen scattered among the toys on the sidewalk after the fire, a small, sad token of a life nearly lost. Now, here it was, a symbol of a life reclaimed. Amelia's eyes welled with tears, but before she could say anything, the little boy, his voice clear and pure, spoke. He looked up at her, his small face serious. "Now it's your turn to be cared for," he said. The words hung in the air, a simple, profound truth that encompassed everything. It was a direct address to her grief, to the pain she had carried for so long, a pain that had made her a hero. The little boy, with the unburdened clarity of a child, saw her not just as the one who had given, but as the one who needed to receive. She had risked her life out of a tragic need to save a child because she had been unable to save her own. And now, in this quiet, peaceful home, a child she had saved was offering her the solace she had been denied. Amelia clutched the teddy bear to her chest, a physical anchor to this new reality. The tears finally fell, a slow, silent release of years of pain. She was not just a hero, not just a rescuer. She was a mother again, in a way she never thought she could be. She was a person who was seen, a person who was loved, a person who was finally, after so long, being cared for. The night went on, the laughter and conversation flowing around her. She was no longer a silent presence. She was at the center of it all. The table was full, and there was a place for everyone. The little boy's words echoed in her mind, a quiet promise, a powerful truth. Now it was her turn. For more stories that matter, join our community. Subscribe to Say Tales.